It's a clerical error, Ewan. And frankly, it's offensive that you'd try to hold the company hostage for 47 grand over a typo. So sign the amendment or hand over your badge. That was how 18 years of loyalty evaporated in a single breath. There was no preamble. There was no polite conversation about the weather or the quarterly projections. There was just the flat, sterile hum of the air conditioning and the piece of paper sliding across the laminate table toward me. I'd love to know where you folks are tuning in from today. Drop your city or country in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. My name is Ewan. I am 52 years old, and I have a habit of needing things to be parallel. When I sit at a table, I align the edge of my notebook with the edge of the desk, and I place my pen exactly perpendicular to both. It's not an obsession, just a way of creating a little bit of order in a chaotic world. I've worked in industrial air filtration sales for nearly 2 decades. It isn't the kind of job that people make movies about. I don't wear Italian suits, and I don't have power lunches with martinis. I sell massive, ugly metal boxes that sit on the roofs of factories and hospitals, scrubbing the air so that people inside don't get sick. It's technical, unglamorous work that requires knowing the difference between a particulate filter and a gas phase absorber. For most of my career, the company, distinctively named Clearflow Systems, was family-owned. The owner, a man named Arthur, knew the names of my kids. He knew that my daughter, Sarah, was in her 3rd year of veterinary school, and that the tuition was bleeding me dry. He knew I drove a sedan with 200,000 miles on it because I prioritized the mortgage and the tuition over looking flashy. Then Arthur retired. He sold the company to a private equity firm based in a glass tower 3 states away. Everything changed within a month. The free coffee in the break room, which used to be decent, was replaced by a vending machine that charged $1.50 for brown sludge. The mood in the office shifted from a cooperative hum to a paranoid silence. And then they sent us Silas. Silas was the new regional director. He was 30 years old, wore suits that were too tight in the shoulders, and spoke in a language of buzzwords that meant absolutely nothing. He didn't know how an air filter worked, and he didn't care. To him, we were just lines on a spreadsheet. He had a recurring physical tic that drove me up the wall. Whenever he was annoyed or feeling superior, which was often, he would pick at the cuticle of his thumb until it bled. I stayed out of his way. I kept my head down, aligned my notebook, and made my calls. My territory was the heavy industrial sector: steel mills, food processing plants, places that smelled like sulfur and hot grease. It was hard selling. You couldn't charm these clients. You had to know your math, and you had to show up in steel-toed boots, not loafers. The trouble started in November. I had been working on a lead for 6 months. It was a massive retrofitting project for a pharmaceutical packaging plant just outside the city limits. They needed to replace their entire intake and exhaust system to meet new federal regulations. It was the kind of job that could make a year's quota in one hit. The commission structure in my contract, the one I had signed 5 years prior, and which had been honored ever since, was straightforward. I received a base salary, which was modest, and a commission of 3% on gross sales. For anything over $1 million, the commission jumped to 4% on the total amount. It was an accelerator clause, designed to incentivize us to chase the whales. The pharmaceutical project was priced at $1.2 million. I did the math on the back of an envelope one night in my kitchen. 4% of $1.2 million was $48,000. After taxes, that would pay off the rest of Sarah's tuition for the year and put a new roof on the house, which had been leaking since the spring rains. It wasn't just money, it was breathing room. It was the ability to sleep through the night without doing mental arithmetic about credit card interest rates. I worked that deal like my life depended on it. I drove to the plant 14 times. I walked the roof with their facility manager, a guy named Miller who didn't trust salespeople. I measured the ductwork myself. I sat in their conference room and redlined blueprints until my eyes blurred. Silas, predictably, was useless. "Why is this taking so long, Ewan?" he asked me one afternoon, leaning against my cubicle wall. He was picking at his thumb. "You're burning gas and time. Just offer them a 10% discount and close it." "I can't do that, Silas," I said, not looking up from my spread of schematics. "If I drop the price 10%, we lose the margin, and the commission accelerator doesn't kick in. Plus, they don't want a discount. They want assurance that the system won't fail. It's a trust sale. Trust doesn't pay the electric bill, Silas sneered. Volume does. You old-timers overthink everything. He walked away, leaving a faint scent of expensive cologne and that underlying smell of the office. The sharp, metallic tang of the ozone from the big copy machine down the hall. That smell, that dry, static charge scent of heated toner and paper, always seemed to hang heaviest in the air when Silas was around. I ignored him. I knew Miller. If I offered a discount too early, he'd think the product was cheap. I held firm. 2 weeks before Christmas, Miller called me. All right, Ewan, he said. His voice was gravelly, distorted by the bad reception inside the plant. You win. The board approved the budget. Send over the final contract. I hung up the phone and sat there for a long time. The office was quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I took my pen, a heavy stainless steel Parker jotter that I'd had for a decade, and clicked it once. It was a solid mechanical sound. Click. Done. I prepared the paperwork. I checked every figure. The total contract value was $1,178,000. The commission was exactly $47,120. I submitted the signed contract to the billing department. I saw the sales log update on the shared server. My name, the client's name, and that beautiful 7-figure number. Silas walked by my desk an hour later. He stopped. He looked at the screen, then at me. He didn't smile. He didn't say good job. He just frowned, picked at his thumb, and walked into his office, closing the door. That should have been my first warning. The pay period came and went. I checked my bank account. The base salary was there. The commission was not. I told myself it was a processing delay. These things happened, especially with a deal this size. I waited another 2 weeks. The next pay cycle arrived. Still nothing. I walked down the hall to the HR office. The HR manager was a woman named Brenda. Brenda had survived the acquisition by making herself invisible. She was nice enough, but she had the nervous energy of a prey animal, constantly scanning for hawks. Hey, Brenda, I said, leaning on her doorframe. I think there's been a glitch with the commission for the pharma project. It's been a month. Brenda didn't look up from her keyboard. She kept typing, her shoulders hunched. You need to talk to Silas, Ewan. Silas? Why? It's a payroll issue. It's not a payroll issue, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She finally looked at me, and I saw genuine pity in her face. Just talk to Silas. He put a hold on it. A cold feeling started in the center of my chest. Not a sudden drop, but a slow, creeping freeze. I walked back to my desk. I aligned my notebook. I aligned my pen. Then I got up and walked to Silas's office. The door was open. He was on the phone, laughing at something. He saw me, held up a finger, and finished his call with a leisurely pace that was clearly a power move. He hung up and swiveled his chair toward me. Ewan, what's up? The commission for the pharma deal, I said. Brenda says you put a hold on it. Ah, that? He leaned back, clasping his hands behind his head. Yeah, we need to discuss that. There's a problem with the calculation. There's no problem, I said, keeping my voice level. 3% base, 4% over $1 million. The contract is over $1 million. The math is simple. Well, see, that's the issue, Silas said. He sat forward, his face composing itself into a mask of fake concern. The private equity partners, the folks upstairs, they've been reviewing legacy contracts. Yours is a legacy contract, Ewan. The accelerator clause. It's not sustainable. It was a mistake in the original drafting years ago. We can't pay 4%. It wipes out our profitability on the unit overhead. It's in my contract, I said. It's been honored for 5 years. It was an error, he repeated, harder this time. We're correcting it. We're going to pay you a flat 2%. That's the new standard for the sales team. I did the math instantly. 2% of 1.1 million was roughly 23,000. He was trying to cut my pay in half. You can't do that, I said. I sold that job based on the incentive. I put the work in. You can't change the terms after the deal is signed. Silas sighed, as if I were a slow child. Ewan, listen to me. The company is restructuring. We need team players. If we pay you that 47 grand, we have to cut budget elsewhere. Maybe lay off a tech. You don't want that on your conscience, do you? It was such a transparent, manipulative lie that I almost laughed. But I didn't laugh. I thought about the tuition bill sitting on my kitchen counter. I want what I earned, Silas. I have a signed contract. His expression darkened. The fake friendliness evaporated. We'll see. I'll run it up the flagpole. He dismissed me with a wave of his hand. I went back to work, but the focus was gone. I spent the next 3 days in a fog of anxiety. I pulled out my copy of my employment agreement from my file cabinet at home. I read it. The language was clear. Accelerator clause effective immediately upon gross sales exceeding. There was no ambiguity. On Friday afternoon, at 4 p.m., an email landed in my inbox. Subject, urgent, contract amendment. It was from HR, CCing Silas. Please come to the conference room immediately. I grabbed my notebook. I grabbed my steel Parker pen. I walked down the hallway. The smell of ozone from the copy room was intense today, sharp and stinging in my nostrils. It reminded me of the electrical storms we used to get in the summer, the kind that broke the heat but left damage in their wake. I walked into the conference room. Silas was there. Brenda was there, looking at her lap. And there was a third person, a lawyer I didn't recognize, a man in a gray suit who looked bored. Silas didn't offer me a seat. Sit down, Ewan, he said. I sat. I placed my notebook on the table. I aligned it with the edge. I took out my pen and set it down, parallel to the notebook. We've reviewed your situation, Silas said. He pushed a document toward me. It was a single sheet of paper, densely packed with text. This is a mutual agreement to modify your compensation plan, retroactive to the start of this quarter. It standardizes your commission to 2%. It corrects the clerical error in your legacy contract. And if I don't sign it? I asked. Silas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then we have to terminate your employment for cause, insubordination, refusal to accept company policy. And if we fire you for cause, Ewan, you get 0 commission, not 2%, 0. And we'll fight your unemployment claim. You're an expensive relic, Ewan, he added, the words landing like stones. And honestly, we're doing you a favor by letting you keep the base salary at all. So just sign the waiver and stop acting like you earned that money. I looked at the paper. It was an ultimatum. Sign away $24,000 or lose the job and the entire $47,000. They knew I had a mortgage. They knew about Sarah's school. They had leveraged my life against me. The lawyer checked his watch. Brenda shifted in her seat. This is illegal, I said softly. It's at-will employment, the lawyer said. His voice was dry, like shifting sand. We can change the terms of employment at any time. You can accept the new terms, or you can resign. Those are the options. I looked at Silas. He was picking at his thumb again. A tiny bead of blood was forming near the nail. He looked confident. He held all the cards. I was 52. Getting a new job in this market, at my age, with a termination for insubordination on my record, it would be a nightmare. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, caged rhythm. I needed that money. But more than that, I needed the job to keep paying the bills while I looked for something else. If I walked out now, I lost everything. I need to read it, I said. It's standard boilerplate, Silas said, annoyed. Just sign it. I read everything I sign, I said. It's how I do my job. Silas rolled his eyes and checked his phone. Fine. You have 5 minutes. I have a tea time. I picked up the document. I adjusted my glasses. I began to read. The document was titled Compensation, Adjustment, and Release of Claims. It was nasty. It stated that I acknowledged the previous commission rate was an error. It stated that I agreed to the new rate of 2%. It stated that I waived any right to sue for back pay. It was a total surrender. I read slowly. The room was silent, except for the hum of the ventilation and the wet sound of Silas worrying his cuticle. Paragraph 1, definitions. Paragraph 2, the new rate. Paragraph 3, the waiver. I got to the bottom of the page. There was a section for employee remarks, addendums, followed by the signature line. It was a small box, usually meant for things like copy received or minor clarifications. My mind was racing. I felt a surge of anger so hot it almost made me dizzy, but I forced it down. I forced it into the cold, logical part of my brain, the part that organized papers and calculated airflow resistance. They were arrogant. They were lazy. Silas was checking his phone. The lawyer was looking out the window. Brenda was staring at her shoes. They weren't watching me. They were just waiting for the result. I gripped my pen. The heavy stainless steel felt cool in my hand. Do you have a problem with paragraph 4? I asked, pointing to a random section. Silas didn't even look up. It's standard, Ewan. Just sign. Okay, I said. I'm signing. I lowered my head. I moved my hand to the paper. I didn't sign immediately. Instead, I moved my pen to the blank lines in the remarks section. I wrote quickly. My handwriting is small, precise, and very legible. I wrote one single sentence, a sentence that changed the meaning of the entire agreement. Then, below that sentence, in the designated box, I signed my name, Ewan J. Miller. I capped my pen. The click sounded loud in the room. Done? Silas asked. Done, I said. I slid the paper back across the table. Silas didn't read it. He didn't even glance at the text. He saw the signature at the bottom, smirked, and snatched the paper up. See? Was that so hard? He stood up, handing the paper to Brenda. File this. Process his check for the 2%. Ewan, get back to work. He walked out of the room without looking back. The lawyer followed him. Brenda gathered her files. She paused for a second, looking at me with that same pity. I'm sorry, Ewan, she whispered. It's okay, Brenda, I said calmly. You just do what you have to do. She left. I sat alone in the conference room for a moment. My hands were shaking now. The adrenaline was crashing. I had just gambled everything on the assumption that Silas was as sloppy as he was greedy. I stood up, aligned the chair with the table, and walked out. I went back to my desk. I continued my work. 2 days later, the deposit hit my account, $23,000, less than half of what I was owed. I paid the immediate bills. I sent a check to the veterinary college. I kept working. I showed up on time. I made my calls. I acted like a beaten dog. Silas gloated. He would walk by my desk and make comments. Glad you got with the program, Ewan. See? Adaptation is key. I said nothing. I just cleaned my glasses and nodded. Inside, I was counting down. I needed a specific amount of time to pass. I needed the pay cycle to close completely, so that the transaction was a matter of permanent record. I needed them to feel safe. The atmosphere in the office grew worse. Emboldened by my submission, Silas started squeezing the other reps. He cut travel budgets. He changed the commission structures for the junior guys. He was tearing the department apart to boost the short-term margins, probably to secure a bonus for himself. He didn't know that inside my desk drawer, I had a photocopy of the document I had signed. Brenda, in her haste or perhaps her guilt, had left the original on the copier glass for about 3 minutes before filing it. I had walked by, seen it, and made a copy. The smell of ozone, that sharp, electric smell. It was the scent of the copy machine, and it was the scent of my insurance policy. I waited 2 weeks. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 14 days after I signed the document, I walked into the office. I didn't go to my cubicle. I went straight to the break room, poured a cup of the terrible vending machine, coffee, and then walked to Silas's office. He was there, feet on his desk, reading a sports magazine. Silas, I said. He looked up, annoyed. What now? I'm busy. I'm resigning, I said, effective immediately. He laughed, a short, barking sound. Okay, well, don't expect a severance package. You quit, you get nothing. I don't need a package, I said. I just need my final paycheck and the remainder of my commission. He frowned, lowering the magazine. What remainder? We paid you. You signed the agreement. You got the 2%. I did sign the agreement, I said. But I think you should read it again. I don't need to read it, he snapped. I wrote it. Actually, I said. The lawyer wrote it, but I added an addendum, and you accepted it. I didn't accept anything, he said, his face reddening. You countersigned the file copy, Silas, and you processed the payment based on that document. That constitutes acceptance of the terms. Get out, he said. Get out before I call security. I'm leaving, I said, but I'll be sending a demand letter to legal for the remaining balance, plus the penalty fees. You're delusional, he spat. I turned and walked away. I packed my box. I took my stapler, my framed photo of Sarah, and my notebook. I left the company laptop. As I walked to the elevator, I could hear Silas shouting for Brenda. Bring me the Ewan file. Now! I pressed the down button. My heart was light. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight of the office on my shoulders. I felt the cool, smooth metal of my Parker pen in my pocket. I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, shutting out the smell of ozone and stress. I knew exactly what was happening upstairs. I knew Brenda was frantically pulling the file. I knew Silas was snatching it from her hands. I knew his eyes were scanning the page, looking for the signature, and I knew the moment he would see it. Because what I had written wasn't just a complaint, it was a contractual clause. And because they were too arrogant to read it, and because they had acted on the contract by paying me the lesser amount, they had legally bound themselves to my terms. I walked out to my car, put my box in the passenger seat, and drove home. I made a sandwich. I sat on my porch. About an hour later, my phone rang. It wasn't Silas. It was the lawyer. "Mr. Miller," he said. His voice wasn't dry anymore. It was tight, controlled. "We have your personnel file in front of us." "Good afternoon," I said pleasantly. "We see an irregularity in the signed document." "No irregularity," I said. "It's very clear. It's in the remarks section, right above the signature line. You added a sentence." "I did. And your client accepted the contract by processing the payment and continuing my employment for 2 weeks under those terms. That's performance of contract." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "What do you want?" the lawyer asked. "I want you to honor the agreement," I said. "The full agreement." The silence stretched again. I could almost hear them sweating. I could imagine Silas in the background, his face purple, picking at his thumb until it was raw. I hung up. I knew the fight wasn't over, but I knew I had them. I had turned their own weapon, the paperwork, the bureaucracy, the sheer indifference to detail, against them. Now, I just had to wait for the check. But to understand why they were so terrified, you have to understand exactly what I wrote. It wasn't just a demand for money. It was a trap that triggered a specific audit clause that the company's own compliance handbook required. I had spent 18 years reading the manuals. I knew the rules better than they did. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of good coffee, the stuff I brewed myself, and waited. At 10 a.m., a courier arrived. He handed me a large envelope. It wasn't a check. It was a cease and desist letter. They were going to play hardball. They were claiming fraud. They were claiming I had defaced company property. They were threatening to sue me for the $23,000 they had already paid. I read the letter. I aligned it with the edge of the table. I took out my pen. I smiled. They really didn't get it. They thought this was about a sales commission. They didn't realize that by challenging the contract now, they were opening a door they would desperately wish they had kept shut. I picked up my phone and dialed a number. Not a lawyer, not the labor board. I dialed the number for the State Inspector General's Office for Public Works. "Hello," I said when the receptionist answered. "My name is Ewan Miller. I'd like to report a violation of federal contracting compliance regarding the Redstone Pharmaceutical Project, and I have the documents to prove it." Because that was the other thing about the pharmaceutical deal. It wasn't just a commercial job. It involved government grant money for green energy upgrades. And to get that money, the contractor, Clearflow Systems, had to certify that all labor practices and compensation structures met specific federal standards. By illegally altering my commission to avoid paying a prevailing wage equivalent, they hadn't just stiffed me, they had committed grant fraud. And the sentence I added to the contract? It was the key that locked them into that fraud. I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted perfect. I was ready for the endgame. The cease and desist letter sat on my dining table for 2 days. It was a thick, angry document, printed on heavy bond paper, full of words like defamation, tortious interference, and breach of confidentiality. It demanded that I retract my statements, return all company property, which I already had, and cease communication with any government entities. I didn't retract anything. I didn't call a lawyer. I just went to the hardware store. I bought 3 buckets of roof sealant and a new extension ladder. If I was going to be unemployed and under siege, I was finally going to fix the leak in the master bedroom. Up on the roof, the air was different. It was cold and crisp, smelling of wet leaves and wood smoke from the chimney 2 houses down. It didn't smell like ozone. It didn't smell like fear. I spent 3 days up there, scraping away old tar and applying the fresh seal. It was methodical work. Scrape, clean, apply, smooth. Parallel lines. Everything in order. My phone rang constantly. I let it go to voicemail. First, it was the company lawyer, then Brenda from HR, sounding breathless and terrified, asking me to please just call them back. Then, finally, Silas. Silas left 5 voicemails. The first was aggressive. Ewan, you're making a huge mistake. The third was bargaining. Look, maybe we can work out a severance package. The 5th was purely manic. You need to pick up the phone, Ewan. You don't understand what you've done. I understood exactly what I'd done. On the 4th day, a sedan pulled into my driveway. It wasn't a company car. It was a black Ford Taurus with government plates. A woman stepped out. She was in her 40s, wearing a functional navy blazer and carrying a leather portfolio. She looked like she didn't have a sense of humor, which was exactly what I was hoping for. I climbed down the ladder, wiping my hands on a rag. "Mr. Miller?" she asked. "That's me. I'm Agent Kowalski, Inspector General's office. You called about the Redstone Pharmaceutical grant compliance?" "I did," I said. "Would you like some coffee? It's fresh." We sat at my kitchen table. I aligned my coasters. I placed the sugar bowl in the exact center of the table. Agent Kowalski opened her portfolio and took out a notepad. "You alleged that Clearflow Systems is falsifying wage reports to meet federal grant requirements," she said. "That's a serious accusation." "It is," I agreed. "The Redstone project is funded by the Green Infrastructure Bill. That bill mandates that all contractors pay prevailing wages and honor existing commission structures for skilled labor and sales engineering to prevent predatory underbidding. If they alter compensation retroactively to inflate margins, they're in violation of the grant terms. It's fraud. And you have proof?" "I have the contract," I said. "And I have the modification they forced me to sign. But more importantly, I have the proof that they accepted my terms, which explicitly stated that the wage reduction was a violation." She looked at me, puzzled. "They accepted terms stating they were violating the law?" "They didn't mean to," I said. "But they did." I walked to my file cabinet and pulled out the photocopy of the document I had signed in that sterile conference room, the one with the ozone smell. I slid it across the table to her. She read it. Her eyes scanned the standard boilerplate, the paragraphs of legal jargon designed to strip me of my rights. Then her eyes reached the bottom of the page. She stopped. She leaned in. A slow, small smile appeared on her face. "They processed the payroll based on this?" she asked. "They did. The check cleared 2 weeks ago. And nobody flagged this?" "Silas was in a hurry," I said. "He wanted to make his tea time." Agent Kowalski closed her notebook. She looked at me with a newfound respect. "Mr. Miller," she said, "I think I need to pay a visit to your former employer. Would you be willing to come in for a formal deposition?" "I'd be happy to," I said. "Actually," she said, checking her watch, "I'm heading over there now to secure their records before they have a chance to misplace anything. Since you're the whistleblower, your presence isn't required, but," she trailed off, looking at the document again. "It might be helpful if you were there to identify the original signatories." I put on my best jacket. I put my Parker pen in my pocket. We drove to the glass tower in her car. Walking back into that building felt surreal. It had only been a few weeks, but it felt like a lifetime. The receptionist looked up, saw me, and her eyes went wide. She started to reach for the phone, but Agent Kowalski flashed her badge. "Don't make any calls," Kowalski said calmly. "We're going to the executive suite." We rode the elevator up. The silence was heavy. The smell of the building hit me again. That recycled air, the faint scent of carpet cleaner and toner. But it didn't make my stomach knot up this time. This time, I was the one bringing the storm. We walked straight past the assistants and into the main conference room, the same one where they had slid the paper across the table to me. Silas was there. So was the company lawyer, the man with the dry voice, and a new man, someone older, in a very expensive suit. This must have been the private equity partner. They were in the middle of a heated discussion, papers strewn across the table. When we walked in, the room went dead silent. "Who is this?" the partner barked. "You can't just walk in here." "Federal Inspector General's office," Kowalski announced, placing her badge on the table. "And you know Mr. Miller." Silas looked like he had seen a ghost. His face was pale, clammy. He was picking at his thumb so hard I could see a smear of blood on his cuff. "This is harassment," the lawyer said, standing up. We have already sent a cease and desist to this former employee. He is disgruntled and, sit down, Kowalski said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. The lawyer sat. We are investigating a report of grant fraud regarding the Redstone contract, Kowalski said. Specifically, the manipulation of sales commissions to bypass overhead caps. That's ridiculous, the partner said, glaring at Silas. We adhere to all compliance standards. We corrected a clerical error in Mr. Miller's contract. He agreed to it. He signed the waiver. I did sign it, I said. My voice was calm. I stepped forward to the table. I didn't sit. I stood at the end, looking down at them. But you didn't read what I signed. We read it, Silas shouted. His voice cracked. It was the standard form. Show them, Silas, I said. Show them the document. The one you filed. The one you used to cut my check. Silas looked at the partner. The partner nodded, his eyes cold. Silas fumbled with a folder in front of him. His hands were shaking. He pulled out the sheet of paper. It's right here, Silas said. He signed it. Ewan J. Miller. Read the section above the signature, I said. The remarks box. Silas looked down. He squinted. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the hard drive in the corner. It says, Silas started, then stopped. He swallowed hard. Read it, the partner demanded. Silas's voice was a whisper. It says, Addendum A. Acceptance of this reduced payment constitutes company admission that the original debt remains valid. Remaining balance of $24,120 is acknowledged as overdue, payable, net 30 days. Failure to remit balance voids this waiver and constitutes a confession of noncompliance with federal regulation 52.22 2-4, grant fraud. Silence. Absolute, crushing silence. The partner snatched the paper from Silas's hand. He read it himself. His face went from red to a terrifying shade of purple. He looked at the lawyer. Did you see this? The partner hissed. The lawyer looked sick. I prepared the blank form. I didn't review the executed copy. Silas said he handled it. He said the employee just signed it. You processed the check, I said softly. You paid me the $23,000. In contract law, that is performance. You accepted the counteroffer. By paying me the lower amount, you legally agreed that it was only a partial payment and that you were admitting to the fraud if you didn't pay the rest. I looked at Silas. He had stopped picking his thumb. He was just staring at the table, realizing his life was over. You tried to steal $47,000 from me, I said. And because you were too arrogant to read one sentence, you just admitted to the federal government that you're defrauding a multi-million-dollar grant. Agent Kowalski stepped forward. If that document is the basis for your payroll records, she said to the partner, then you have legally certified that you are in non-compliance, which means the Redstone grant is immediately suspended pending a full audit. We'll be seizing your servers now. The partner looked at me. There was no arrogance left, only calculation. He knew how much the Redstone deal was worth. He knew how much a federal fraud investigation would cost. It would destroy the firm's reputation. It would kill the stock price. Everyone out, the partner said, except Mr. Miller and the agent. Silas, get out, he added, his voice like ice. Silas stood up. He looked at me one last time. There was no hate in his eyes anymore, just shock. He walked out of the room, and I noticed he forgot his phone on the table. He was a man walking to his execution. The lawyer followed him, looking at the floor. When the door closed, the partner turned to Agent Kowalski. How do we fix this? He asked. I can't fix your fraud, Kowalski said. But Mr. Miller here seems to have a valid contractual claim for unpaid wages. That's a civil matter. The fraud, that's criminal. Unless, of course, it was a clerical error that is immediately rectified. She looked at me. She was giving me the opening. It seems, I said, looking at the partner, that there was a misunderstanding. Silas seemed to think my commission was an error. But clearly, based on the addendum I wrote and you accepted, the company always intended to pay the full amount. The partner didn't hesitate. He was a predator, and he knew when he was caught in a trap. He pulled a checkbook from his inside jacket pocket. The balance was $24,000, he asked, plus interest, I said, and legal fees, and a consulting fee for the time I've spent correcting your compliance records. He didn't blink. How much? $80,000, I said, total. and a letter of recommendation stating I resigned in good standing. It was nearly double what they owed me, but it was a fraction of what they would lose if Kowalski formally filed the fraud charges that afternoon. The partner wrote the check. He tore it out with a sharp rip that echoed in the room. He slid it across the table. And the investigation? He asked Kowalski. Kowalski looked at the check, then at the document. If the employee is paid in full according to the original contract terms, then the confession of non-compliance in his addendum is moot. I'll still need to review your books for the next 6 months, but I won't shut down the Redstone site today. She picked up the document, the one with my handwriting on it, and put it in her portfolio. I'll keep the original, she said, for my files. I picked up the check. I aligned it with the edge of the table. I checked the date. I checked the signature. Thank you, I said. I turned and walked out. I walked past Silas's office. He was packing a box. Security was standing at the door, watching him. He looked up as I passed. He looked small. He looked like a line on a spreadsheet that had just been deleted. I didn't stop. I didn't say anything. I just clicked my Parker pen once, a solid, mechanical sound, and kept walking. The elevator ride down was fast. When the doors opened to the lobby, the air rushed in. It wasn't recycled. It was the air from the street, smelling of exhaust and coffee and rain. It smelled real. I drove straight to the bank. I deposited the check. The teller raised an eyebrow at the amount, but I just smiled and told her I'd had a very productive week. Then I drove home. I finished the roof that afternoon. I sat on the peak of my house, looking out over the neighborhood. I could see the elementary school, the grocery store, and the distant skyline where the glass tower stood. I took out my phone and called Sarah. "Hey, Dad," she answered. She sounded tired. Exams were coming up. "Hey, sweetie," I said. "I just wanted to let you know. I transferred the tuition money. For next semester, too." There was a pause. "Dad, are you sure? I can take another loan." "I'm sure," I said. Worked out. We're good. You just focus on those animals." "Thanks, Dad. You're the best." I hung up. The sun was setting. The light was turning. That deep, bruised purple that happens right before twilight. I looked at my hands. They were stained with roof tar. They were rough, but they weren't shaking. I thought about Silas. I thought about the partner. I thought about the millions of dollars moving through invisible wires, controlled by people who never touched the things they sold. They thought they could erase me because I was quiet. They thought because I aligned my pens and followed the rules, I was weak. They forgot that rules are a double-edged sword. If you hold the blade right, you can cut through anything. I had my money, I had my dignity, and I had a roof that didn't leak. That was enough. I climbed down the ladder, cleaned my brushes, and put everything back in its place. Parallel, organized, ready for whatever came next. Thanks for listening to my story. It's been a wild ride, and if there's one takeaway, it's this. Always read the fine print, especially the parts you write yourself. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and I've got plenty more stories from 30 years in the trade. Stay safe out there, and don't let anyone tell you what you're worth.